Think about what we're used to nowadays with modern web design. Pages are minimalistic and sleek, they have a heavy use of negative space, technical but easily read features that add a bit of motion, and a minimal use of color with a clear focus on the overall color palette of the page. If you're used to this style of design, then visiting a Japanese website is often shocking and immediately overwhelming. Everything is boxy and rigid as if you've just time traveled back 10 years in web design. There's a heavy use of vibrant and diverse colors which creates eye-catching features that interrupt any sense of color uniformity. There's a lot of text in a very small area accompanied by low-resolution images packed closely together. This close proximity means that negative space is generally not utilized. It almost starts to remind you of something. Now, it's clear that the stark divide between Japanese and Western web design comes from a cultural difference rather than any kind of technical limitation. Big foreign companies like Starbucks will often have their Japanese website localized for the Japanese audience. That being said, Japanese web design has been rapidly modernizing over the course of the past 2 to 3 years, but why was it like this in the first place? Put simply, the Japanese language can't use the same efficient text encoding that English can. Because of this, it was way more efficient to not run your website with text, but with images with text just baked into them. And it was really important to maximize that efficiency, since Japan was a huge pioneer of early mobile phone and cellular network technology, so they needed well-optimized websites that people could use on those 90s flip phones. It actually worked out pretty well, since Japanese people were already used to this design style on advertisements, signs, and newspapers. That immediately answers some questions. Things are boxy and clustered together without negative space because the web programmers were trying to keep the site as optimized as possible. Even though Unicode and modern computing has eliminated this technical hurdle, a lot of websites are still designed like that, even if they're actually just loading in text. Despite the fact that this design style partially stemmed from a technical issue, there was no real need to modernize, as this is how a lot of Japanese people just use websites. In general, companies will set up their websites as a big online flyer with the hopes that something catches your eye and you'll follow up on it. On starbucks.co.jp, we can pretty much immediately see the difference. You instantly know what their big promotion is, and then you can look over to see minor promotions, news, and then the actual site functions. This general look is kind of like 5 years behind, but it's honestly way better than their American website. Like, I didn't even know that these features existed on the American website, but they do. They're just nested inside of these other buttons, probably to make it easier to navigate on a phone. This brings us back to mobile compatibility. Japanese websites were designed from the get-go for mobile use, whereas Western website design started on the PC but became more and more influenced by smartphones as time went on. This means that we're currently in this bizarre middle ground, like we open up starbucks.com. Immediately, the first promotional element isn't even fit on the screen, and it just looks like everything is scaled to fit horizontally. I have a 24-inch monitor, so this is just uncomfortable to look at. I suspected this is due to the compromise for the mobile version of the site, and yeah, it looks a lot better. At least every element fits on the screen, but this homepage is really sparse, and all the important functions are nested into this menu. Meanwhile, in the Japanese version, this looks really good. I think the blocky design works really well to convert these horizontally aligned elements on the desktop version into a vertical alignment that's more natural for the screen of the phone. This might be visually behind by about 5 years, but this is leagues ahead in functionality. Unfortunately, this blocky design seems to be falling out of style somewhat, as Japanese websites have been rapidly modernizing in design over the past 2 to 3 years. This is likely due to Japanese people getting increased exposure to Western web design via websites like YouTube, Twitter, Amazon, and oops, not that one. Japan seems to have a large talent pool for skilled web scripters, which was originally responsible for Japanese websites having a ton of Flash-based features. This large talent pool means that Japanese websites are very intricate and feature-heavy, which as a Westerner is honestly kind of overwhelming in its own way. What's this one? Oh. It's spin the chocolate, okay. Alright. Okay. What? Something wrong. Who's this guy? Alright. Thanks, buddy. Got a cat? Okay. Alright. That's, Oh! Oh, that's how they display their elements. They don't have them in like a list, they have them as these floating things that you click on. Oh, that's unique. That's clever.